Is that coming through for you, comrades? Lovely.
Yes, I see that.
Okay, hello everyone, welcome. Yep, I'm Jack and welcome to this session from Content Design London and me, held in conjunction with our lovely partners on disability, language and inclusive design. So you've already heard about me being from Content Design London. Before I was here, I was at the disability charity Scope, where we designed information and advice content for disabled people and their families. We did that for 6 years. Everything was built on primary research and tested with disabled people. That's why I approach inclusive design and accessibility the way I do, starting with the question, can people with diverse access needs understand and use the stuff we're making, using the tools and standards out there to support us in kind of meeting that design goal? And subsequently, I've also worked on content for UK and international nonprofits, as well as local government. So Content Design London, CDL, we work with people around the world, and our mission is to create advocates for human-centered design practices, including accessible design. Our consultant training and books have helped thousands of people around the world. We partner with organizations using a research and insight-led approach to do that, to transform content, improve products and services, and kind of have a positive impact on the experiences people have. And CDL is held in kind of high regard as the place that founded the principles of content design. So what we're going to cover today. This session is mostly about approaches to writing about disability and the what of inclusive design rather than the how, or we will cover a little bit of the how. Today we're going to focus on the social model of disability and also look at a person-first approach, look at the limits of medical and legal approaches in inclusive design, and talk about why listening to disabled people is so important and how to get started in kind of doing that in your design workflows. And then at the end, we'll talk about some fundamental techniques for accessible content. A bit of housekeeping, please make yourself comfortable, get a drink if you haven't got one already, get involved, and yeah, please ask questions in the chat, both of me, I'll pick those up at the end, but please also talk amongst yourselves because that community aspect is really important and will help to lift this session. So not so much a disclaimer, it's a bit of context, like what we're learning today will be useful. And I hope for a while yet, but the language that people have used to talk about disability has always changed, and it will change again, and that's a good thing, and we should embrace it. That said, let's start with the social model of disability. If anyone is familiar with that, please or has never heard of it at all, please mention in the chat. If you're already applying those principles in your organization, please again let us know. Rules can feel reassuring, and I will, especially to content people, we love rules. I will talk about how these approaches handle language, but the way they can shift the focus of your work is probably the most valuable thing. And that can be as a designer, as an influencer, or a leader at your organization. You might be wearing all of those hats or just one. I'm going to start by talking about the social model. That's the one applied by the UK disability charity Scope. And the social model uses what's called identity first language. In the UK, the social model of disability is widely used by disability activists and people using a design justice approach. It's widely used, not by everyone. People are different. It's a way of looking at the world developed by disabled people with its roots in the disability rights movement. But broadly, the model says that people have conditions or impairments. Those conditions means that they have access needs, and it's designed decisions that disable people when those access needs are not met. So here, disable is a verb. It is something that we, society, do to people. As an inclusive design tool, the social model does a really important job. It's not just about language, although language is often the part people notice most. But it shifts our focus as designers. The social model focuses on the barriers that exclude people. And it makes us face into our discomfort because it's us, society, the decisions we make, the things and systems we design and reinforce that disable people. So the social model is why, if you're designing content in the UK, you should probably write disabled people rather than people with disabilities. That's the identity first language. And it's almost also why you should almost certainly not use euphemisms like differently abled. Those are usually a way for non-disabled people to avoid feeling uncomfortable, but dismantling barriers that exclude disabled people means that we have to want to see them. And that often means that as designers, we have to face into our discomfort. That's part of the job. And now we're going to look at another approach, the person first language. So with person first language, you start with the person and then you talk about their condition. The intent behind that is to see a person before you see their condition. And it is a chance to think about how you could be othering people. So if you start writing about disabled people as they a lot, think about why and if there's a way around that. And that's why people who use a person first approach will talk about being a person with a disability rather than as a disabled person, as you would if you're applying the social model. So those are two different approaches. What should we do? That's a lot of information. And you all want to do the right thing, which is lovely. That's why you're here. But how do we reconcile these things? And the answer is by applying a lot of good fundamental content design practices. So one, research your audience's language. How do people write about themselves? Two, test your content, products and services. For content, you can start with basic tests like a highlighter test. And if you're comfortable doing that, you can move through to something like scenario testing, which are possibly more reliable for understanding, checking understanding. And while you're doing these things, if people find your content offensive, if you've created a situation where they feel safe, they will tell you, and all you'll have to do is listen. And finally, I'd say, please don't correct people talking about their own lives. We don't want to be the language police for this because it's not a good look. I would suggest that you can use both approaches at the same time to reshape your design intent and focus. So find barriers, find out how you're excluding people in your existing product or service, or if you're running a discovery, a greenfield discovery, make sure your research includes the barriers disabled people face in the problem space you're researching. Center the person and universal needs. That includes dignity, joy, and privacy. So, for example, do not make people share personal or medical information when it isn't necessary, and it usually isn't. There isn't one official way to show you're disabled. And again, you should use a trust-based model that does not force people to share unnecessary personal information. If there's anyone using a trust-based model for their service online or in person, please let me know in the chat. I would love to hear from you. Equal dignity. So to use an example from physical services, making people wait outside in the rain and ring a doorbell for assistance, so something like a ramp or for someone to open the door, is not dignified or joyful. And there are digital versions of this as well. So for example, publishing content just in a PDF and making people contact you and wait for an accessible version. We can do better than this, and it's not okay, and in some situations may not be legal. Make your service inclusive. You know, when you know about barriers excluding people, you can start to think radically about how to remove them. Big clue, even if most of the touch points in your service are digital, that may mean providing alternatives to make a truly kind of inclusive service. There are lots of dimensions to inclusive design. One of these is accessibility. A service is accessible when people with diverse access needs can use it. So my next instruction is to focus on access needs and how they shape people's lives. Conditions can affect a person's ability to see, hear, think, and move, and these conditions affect how people use content, products, and services. So, for example, someone might use a tablet at very high magnification. People might use captions or for video or audio content. Using a keyboard to navigate on a computer, so not using a mouse. Text-to-speech, a screen reader. That's probably not a new idea for a lot of people in the audience, but I would like to append that that might be specialist software, or it might be a built-in one, something like VoiceOver on iOS or the Android equivalent. It may also include, particularly for energy limiting conditions, the need to lie down or take breaks. This image is adapted from the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit, which is great. I strongly recommend reading it. Conditions can affect any of our senses. Conditions can be permanent, temporary, or come up in particular contexts or situations. So what we've got here is touch, and the permanent condition here is having one arm. So if you've had an arm amputated or you were born without an arm, then that condition is permanent. A temporary situation could be having a broken arm in a cast. And if you've ever held a baby, you know what it's like to be in a situation where you do not have full use of both your arms. The parents, carers, and committed supporting relatives will know what I'm talking about in the audience. Broadening this out into sight and hearing. For sight, a permanent condition may be one that will make you blind. In the UK, and context specific, if you have access to medical care, a cataract might be temporary. The example they've used in this one for compromised sight situations is driver. I'm not a big fan of that because I don't think drivers should be using other products while they're driving. But kind of a more less tastic example might be using a screen in direct sunlight, or losing your glasses. I'm pretty useless without my glasses. I have to hold my phone about here. Let's look at access needs in an example. So this one's about me. So I have a condition. I am deaf in one ear. I have a hearing impairment. My access needs are I need to meet online where I can control my environment, or if I do meet in person, I need a room with no echo. I need to choose where I sit, and I need to be able to see the speaker's mouth. This usually means that I'm not disabled. I'm not disabled now at this online event, and I almost always pass as non-disabled, even when I am being disabled, unless someone really needs to test me on whether I've heard what they've said or not. You can't tell that just by looking at me. Here's another example. So this person is an amputee. Their access needs include using a power chair, and there's a bunch of things that go with that. So needing level access, so no steps, needing enough space to turn and lower surfaces and counters. And this person is likely very often disabled by design decisions. So let's apply that to a specific context. Let's think about work, maybe work in an office. Think about those in terms of office space, counter height and level access. Maybe even think about your office if that helps, or the last place you studied or worked if you work from home. I'd like you to examine your assumptions about this situation of office spaces, when it might be important to think about having enough space. So, for example, did you think about public transport to get to the office, or entry from the street, or access to all floors in the building, not just the one that someone's permanent desk space might be on. Outside spaces, using the toilet, reception, so thinking about counter height, and again for counter height, say kitchen or canteen, those sort of eating areas. Now it's okay if you didn't think about all of those. I'm just mentioning them to sort of highlight why testing, inclusive testing, is so important, because there will be things that you will not think about, as with any kind of user-centered design testing. It's really important. And now I'd like to talk about ideas that are super popular but will not help you to do inclusive design, but they're quite insidious. They have a way of like worming their way into our implicit, into our assumptions and implicit decisions. They're really widespread, and they're trusted because they're linked to professions that need trust to work. They're good at solving some specific problems, but those problems are not how to do inclusive design. And using them when you're trying to do inclusive design is not a neutral act. It will create access barriers. So let's start with the medical model. The medical model says that disability lives in the body, that people need to be fixed. The medical model is good for getting some kinds of diagnosis and treatment. That's its strength, diagnosis and treatment. Not all conditions can be fixed, and the medical model actually sometimes doesn't work super well for energy limiting conditions or for managing pain. Learning to spot the medical model means you can stop it sneaking into your design decisions, and this means this will make you a kind of more user-centered designer and a more inclusive designer. Examples of the medical model sneaking into service design would be asking people to share that proof of diagnosis or something related, like receiving benefits. If you're working with subject experts who have a mental model that's aligned with the medical model of disability, you will probably need to advocate for your users and other design approaches if you're going to make something that's inclusive and accessible. The legal model is another widespread way of thinking about disability, but it's also really limited and exclusionary. The legal model is really good. Well, the job it does is at helping you to find out what your rights are. So in the UK, the Equality Act 2010 talks about reasonable adjustments to make products and services accessible. Reasonable adjustments do have quite sort of good brand recognition among people who self-identify as disabled, even if what they are and how people get them isn't super clear, particularly in some areas, say like public transport. You might hear people talking about accommodations, which is an idea that comes from the US legal system, but it's roughly equivalent. The law also covers minimum standards. So, for example, the UK Public Sector Bodies Accessibility Regulations 2018 or the European Accessibility Act. So those things between them cover public bodies and commercial organisations selling into the EU. The legal model of disability has quite stark limits when you start to examine it. So strict definitions, legal definitions exclude people. So for example, in the UK, if you were in a car crash and you could not use your arms for 5 months, you would not have rights under the Equality Act because of the length of time that affects you. You would not legally count as disabled, but you would still have very profound and real access needs during that time. Knowing what your rights are doesn't always help. If a bus driver refuses to make a wheelchair space available to you, and that's the only safe space you can sit, knowing you are legally in the right doesn't help you get on that bus, and asserting yourself in the moment may put you at risk, particularly, if you don't carry certain privileges which mean that your complaint is seen as valid. That's when an intersectional approach can come in really handy. That's not a privilege everyone has. The law is not accessible to everyone all of the time, and that's a function of time, money, and energy, which depending on your condition can be very limited. It doesn't even necessarily have to be related to your condition. Like, society is really hostile to disabled people, so having to fight those battles every day just may mean you don't have it in you in that time. And the law is the minimum. It's the floor, not the ceiling. And that's something we understand really, really well for other areas of human life. So like the Criminal Justice Act will deter you from assaulting your guests or employees, but it won't help you to throw a good party, and it won't help you to be a good employer. Similarly, thinking about accessibility just in terms of legal risk will not help you to make inclusive products and services. And your content can pass automated tests based on web content accessibility guidelines that are referenced by pieces of legislation and still not be usable for people with a range of access needs until you run inclusive testing. And those would be usability tests. Inclusive content and services. What does that mean? Let's break it down a bit. A service is something that helps someone to do something. Inclusive, there are lots of dimensions to inclusive design, and one of these is accessibility. As referenced earlier, a service is accessible when people with diverse access needs can use it. Let's work through an example. So most digital services are forms. This digital form is an example. It's an attempt to make an in-person service accessible, to make it inclusive for people with diverse access needs. That's a really good thing, but this is a bad form. I'm starting with a bad form because there are lots of bad forms, and because good people make bad things for good reasons all the time. The things that make this a bad form: it focuses on the condition, not the access need. It makes the person share medical information that is not needed to make to access the service. And the designer has assumed that they know what the person filling in the form will need. There's a drop-down list with a fixed number of choices. Obviously, that's a very limited number. The issue here isn't so much the number as the fact that it is fixed. So if I take this form and apply the rules of the social model language, I get something like this. Looks nice. It looks great, right? It uses lovely social model language, just like Scope says I should, which is awesome. But it has not fixed the fundamental problems with this form. So starting with the title, reasonable adjustments is a legal term. People who self-identify as disabled may well recognize it. It's from the Equality Act 2010. People who meet that definition have of disabled has the right to reasonable adjustments. There are two problems with this. Do we only want to meet the access needs of people who self-identify as disabled? Two, is our goal to keep those adjustments, to gatekeep them for only for people who meet that legal definition? This better form still asks people to share medical information. It does ask about your condition rather than disability, but this information is not needed to meet access needs. And this version still assumes that the person running this service knows what you need. It offers those two same reasonable adjustments: wheelchair access or a hearing loop. And if you need anything different, well, you're out of luck on this form. So let's work back to the design intent behind the form. This is the user story. It's for an employment support service that offers in-person workshops to people applying for work. It's based on a real service, and it goes, as a person with access needs who wants support applying for a job, I want to find out if this workshop will be accessible to me so that I can decide if I will use this service. So it's people are deciding how to spend their time and energy. Need to know how they will do the action. And the acceptance criteria for the user story, the checklist, if you like, is the content is done when I can tell if the service is accessible to me. I know that I can ask for adjustments for my access needs, and I can ask for the adjustments I need. And broadly, this is the design pattern you can follow, or at least start with. For your service when you're asking people about access needs. One is describe your service. Two, say how people using it can find out more about the service and how then it may interact with their access needs. So you're not taking it for granted that your description is going to cover all the bases. Like, do your best, but you might not cover their bases because people are different. Give 3 examples of adjustments. Make it clear that those are examples. That's to show that you're willing to be flexible, to make changes. but not so many that people see it as a set list and panic that the thing they need is not there. And the last thing is to let people ask for what they need in a way that's easy for them. And if you do that, you'll end up with something like this. The title is Accessibility and Adjustments. The emphasis is aligned with our inclusive design intent on accessibility. The word adjustments is still there because it's well recognised in the UK. If I was designing for an international or US audience, I might be tempted to use accommodations instead of adjustments on the version I was testing. Then we describe the service. We may call you or invite you for an in-person interview. I've included links so people can find out more. So a link to the office location and a video with audio description and captions showing what it's like getting from the street into the building. That's so people can make their own decisions about how the environment may interact with their access needs. We give examples of adjustments and ask people what they may need. And the answer field is free text. So in this new version of the form, we do not assume we already know what people will need because people are different. And we are not asking people to provide medical information or share information about their benefits. And we are not, as a result of that, suggesting that we are rationing or gatekeeping adjustments. And as a byproduct, in this situation, we are not asking people about disability. We're asking people about accessibility. So for this worked example, by aligning with our design intent, we're actually not saying disabled people or people with disabilities because we don't need to. And to bring that round to an example you might have seen more often in life, toilets have never been disabled, but the best ones though are accessible. Another part of this puzzle, a big one, is to find ways to listen and include disabled people in your design workflows. In design research and in life, if you're not sure about how people talk about their lives and themselves, find places where they do and pay attention. Social Model can be great for that. Subreddits, YouTube, Blue Sky is starting to pick up. I would have, until a week ago, recommended TikTok. I may yet still, jury's out on that for the moment. And failing that, ask people politely how they talk about themselves and how they would like you to talk. And think about if there's a way for you to shift the power in that interaction, in that relationship, so that people get to talk for themselves about themselves. Let's look at an example. So should you write autistic people or people with autism? Often people with the condition talk about it as being integral to their identity. They are autistic, and it's best to pass the mic to people who are living it. Sometimes parents of autistic children will talk about mourning the normal child they didn't have, as well as they'll probably talk about their child having autism, or that is at least quite common. Autistic people usually find this fairly offensive. If you're writing for parents, find ways to meet people where they are emotionally, because raising a disabled child in a hostile society is hard. It is traumatic, but the loudest voices are not the only voices. And remember that their children may read it too. Another example, should you write deaf with a lowercase d, uppercase d, or talk about hearing impairments? And the answer is, favorite UX designer answer, it depends. There are lots of factors. How severe someone's condition is one of those factors. People with little or no hearing are less likely to talk about a hearing impairment. They may have been born with their condition and will find the idea of hearing loss simply does not apply to them. Certainly doesn't apply to me. And if they see being deaf as a political identity or not, will usually dictate if you need to use an uppercase D or not. And there's no easy answer. It's nuanced and there's no way around that. Ask people and listen. You also need to think about who is in the room when you are making design decisions and who's not in the room. So nothing about us without us is a slogan from the disability rights movement. It's provocative and it's designed to make us feel uncomfortable. I urge you to face into that discomfort. If you're writing about disabled people in an organisation where disabled people are not involved in the process, use that discomfort as motivation. Start by following disabled people and creators. The fastest way to start hearing from people who are not like you is on social media. Try to look for intersectionally diverse perspectives. If there are no disabled people in your life, that's a great place to start. But if you're serious about inclusive design, you have to start looking at the people in your organization making design decisions. These roles in kind of roughly ascending order of power and influence are co-production, testing and research. Please pay people for these roles in money or vouchers. Ask people what would be most helpful, because money can sometimes affect benefits in weird and wonderful ways that could put people at risk. And then you've got employees and leaders. I've got some recommended social media follows to help get you started. I'm just going to pop some in the chat, and they are Robbie Crow at the BBC, Holly Took at RNIB, and Rachel Charlton Daly, who is a disability rights campaigner and journalist. These accounts often amplify other disabled creators and campaigners, so that's a good place to get started. To finish, I'd just like to go over some fundamental techniques for accessible content. So that's the how. Go over some of the greatest hits. Use familiar words. Familiar words are easier to read. Use short sentences. Often in government design circles, a limit of 25 words is kind of wheeled out. I'd say that's a limit, not a target. Something like the Hemingway editor app is quite good at highlighting longer sentences, and the readability checker in Word is also. Format your headings using heading styles, so headings 1, heading 2, and so on. Links should say what they do, so the clickable links, link text should be meaningful, so no click here or read more. Image alt text for content bearing images. Check color contrast. Any tools that check against WCAG2 will do. I'd also recommend reading the RNIB guidance for a kind of a more nuanced take. There can in some situations be such a thing as too high a contrast. But if you're following kind of accessibility guidelines, being able to change the colors on your web page will be kind of baked in. So if you're already doing the work there, that also covers you. Text for meaning, not just color. You can't rely on color to communicate meaning. Please stop putting content just in PDFs. Put it on a web page as well, or if that is for organizational reasons tricky. Providing a Word document is probably the next best thing, but HTML is best. If that is all kind of really familiar to you, I urge you to start following the work of Adam Silver, form designer, an accessible form designer, and he goes in depth about form fields, labels, alt text, and prompts, and how to use those. And that's it from me in terms of the presentation. If you'd like to learn more, please sign up to Content Design London's monthly newsletter for sneak peeks, special offers, and resources. Visit our website to find out about our courses, which are all CPD accredited and considered kind of the gold standard. And you can also find us on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. So thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon. I will stop the screen share. I'm just going to post some links into the chat.
Thank you, Jack. That's wonderful. There are a couple of questions and chats going on in the chat already. I'll pick up on the first question if that's okay. So when designing forms, we usually have to include certain fields or options because the back end requires that data. So this is the organizational need and the organization kind of enforcing that. How would you advise handling it?
I'd recommend following Caroline Jarrett's kind of question protocol approach. I'd also say the organization has to have it when and why. So you may have to have it in order to fully process a customer interaction. Do you have to have it at that touch point? Can you get it later? So the example I like to wheel out actually was the internship, the application process I designed a while back. We had to have information on people's 5-year working history, including gaps. But that can be, we wanted to encourage applications from people with kind of diverse backgrounds who may have had to take time out from work for whatever reason. And asking people that up front is really obstructive and can be quite hostile. So what we did was we just asked for it later. We made sure we got it, but we didn't ask for it at the point of application. We asked for it when we were processing people's right to work information. So yeah, the organization has to have it. Do you have to have it then? And is there a way around that?
Very good advice. I really liked earlier as well. I'm going to invite everyone on the call to pop any questions in the chat, or please do raise your hand. But one of the things I was picking up on quite early on in your presentation was that end-to-end journey, particularly when people have those different touch points. It's always an interesting conversation starter when journeys aren't just online. So I was going to ask you about your experience of that, not just the digital part of that journey and how that interacts with offline as well.
Yeah, I think my main experience with that is in the information and device space. So you don't have to cover everything. Make sure there is an evidence base for you making that, and that can save you some grief. So for example, people may have real problems, and that may come up in your primary research, but they may not be problems they're solving online. So I'm thinking back to a situation where disabled people wanted to hire personal assistants to help them with kind of daily tasks. And there were many kind of rich and varied challenges that people had in hiring and keeping personal assistants. But it turned out there was only an evidence basis for people searching online when they were hiring and when something wasn't going well. And so we did map out the whole journey, and it was important for us to do that. But in so doing, we realized that actually only a couple of stages of that were online. And that way we were able to make the information and advice easier to follow. Yeah, does that answer your question?
It does, yes. It's always that quite often it's other teams or other areas that hold the power over a different content as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting.
Yeah, I have a blog post in the works about that actually. So stay tuned.
Keep our eyes peeled for it. Apologies if I pronounce your name wrong, but Ayla, did you want to come in and ask a question?
Yeah, it's Ayla. Yeah, thank you, Jack. That was really interesting. I'm from the Home Office on the content design.
Do we feel that the sort of we've lost a little bit?
I'm getting a lot of interference on the line. I'm sorry.
Being sort of straddling two teams, or is it just it's not a Catherine thing, and it's just more of a team thing?
I'll put my
understand this one so we can.
Thank you. I'm so sorry.
I'm not trying to do any.
Was difficult when there's background noise. While we wait for that question to come through, is there anyone else who would like to come in and ask a question? There is, Pauline, come on in.
Hiya, just I thought really interesting presentation, Jack. This made me think about lots of things and, made my brain consider stuff. But it's common, isn't it, that different people need different accommodations or have different accessibility needs, and quite often they might contradict each other or cause a problem. So how, by doing something for one person, it might make it more difficult for another person to access your service or your information. I just wondered, have you got any thoughts around that and how we could avoid that situation or you know, address it?
Well, people need different things. I think the way that is often phrased is in contradictions, but they can be complementary, is the way I would like to get comfortable with doing things in more than one way. Then they're not contradicting each other. The quiet part of that question, and I don't want to project that onto you necessarily, Pauline, but mainly thinking about other conversations I had, is that the quiet part of that question is, we are only going to do this in one way. So which way are we going to do? And the answer is, if you're going to make something that's accessible and inclusive, you might have to do it in more than one way.
Excellent, thank you.
My pleasure. I think another way to think about it is in kind of web development. The cool thing, it's less of a cool thing, or that's having a bit of a renaissance, was progressive enhancement. The idea that you would layer technologies on top of each other, but to start with a baseline experience, and each thing would kind of get fancier as you went up. And you can do that in the ways you present data. So, for example, you might have an infographic that's like super fancy at the top, and your alt text might be kind of the next layer underneath that. The layer underneath that might be providing people with access to the kind of raw tabular information. So a spreadsheet or table that's properly marked up. So the idea is that any one of those things might not fully meet someone's need, but if they have access needs, but if they work their way through the stack, they're going to find enough of what they need. Now, if you did any one of those things, you'd be excluding someone. But if you layer them up, you can have an approach which will be inclusive, and because people can sort of drill through that stack and fail gracefully, then they'll at least have something.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I put a question in the chat around accommodations and having the list, you know, on one of your bad forms, they had a list of accommodations. So there was an interesting conversation going on in the chat about, I was asking whether you could have a list and then put other, and somebody mentioned, I think it was it Joanna, was it you? Somebody said that, you know, that obviously it could be limitless accommodation, so you can't have an unlimited list, and but I'm neurodiverse and I like a list. I'd like to be able to choose, and there are a lot of people who it's quite a difficult cognitive load to think about what do I need, and if it's written there and I can just pick a couple of things and put another if there's, you know, something that doesn't apply. So I appreciate the list might make it difficult for some people, or might feel restrictive to some people, but then for others like myself, it'd be a really positive thing, you know, be useful.
Having a list, so I take the point on board that having a list as a prompt would be useful.
Yeah.
But I would warmly push back against making people pick from a list.
Yeah, no, just I suppose if you could pick and have that other box, you don't have to type it all down either, do you? So if you've got issues with, I don't know, spelling, dyslexia, it can be embarrassing.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think there are design solutions that maybe don't come across so well in the slide. So things like autocomplete and suggestions, for sure. I take the point, and I think it's a valid one.
There's a lovely comment just in the chat then, which really highlights that, in terms of that's what makes these designs so interesting but also challenging. There is no one size fits all.
No.
It's great. I've got some more questions come through in the chat. So interested in the bits about rationing and gatekeeping. We monitor a mailbox where people email to request alternative formats, and we want to focus on those who have access needs. However, we get a lot of emails from those who want alternative formats or other purposes, for example, wanting a spreadsheet of our list of sponsor companies so they can sort them for marketing purposes. And we want to make sure we are prioritising those with access needs. Can we say, please only get in touch if you have an access need?
Can you, or should you?
Questions, can you? Yeah.
Some people may genuinely find it easier to process a spreadsheet. How would you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting question.
I take the point, but that is is defensive design. You're defending your commercial interests and could, in the process, be excluding people. I mean, I understand that. Can I defend it as an inclusive designer? Probably not.
Thank you. Another question coming in the chat. Could you signpost someone to the primary research on content design for neurodiversity? This person has expressed they have ADHD and find some of their own forms very frustrating. Use their organisation's forms.
So I don't know of like a single resource that is condition specific. I mean, the hits still apply. So gov.uk form design principles are probably among the best. But like the field is developing all the time, particularly in terms, say, of numbers. Like there's Laura is running, I forget her surname, is running a really great podcast on accessible numbers at the moment. So it's always advancing. It's interesting. People often ask for condition-specific resources, and I see why. And particularly if you self-identify, and people want to do the right thing. It's interesting. So if I wanted to set myself up for like massive monetary success, I would pick a few conditions and say, here are the resources for this one condition. But I think that is also sometimes a route for the medical model to sneak in by the back door, and also does slightly feed into the, well, if you're designing for this one condition, that means you're compromising this other condition sort of competition argument. But taking the question at face value, and I think it's a really good one, is I'd say gov.uk form design patterns supplemented by the subsequent work of Adam Silver, previously referenced, and test your stuff. But like the things like the one thing per page design pattern, that's really good for people with ADHD. Generally, again, people are different. It's really, really good for people who are stressed. It's really good for people who are tired. There are a multitude of benefits.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to Owen and Julie as well, who've popped some links to some of those resources in the chat as well. Really useful. Thank you. And yeah, just from what you were saying there, Jack, it is that we want to avoid a tick box or some predefined list of if you do all these things, then yes, you've done it all. You're really keeping people at the heart and keep testing and challenging and learning how we can improve. Very interesting. Just looking back in the chat, there's lots of conversations and questions coming through, so I'm just trying to catch up. Is there anyone who wanted to pop their hand up and come in as I'm reading through? Is there any research about how well the phrase access needs is understood by the general public? We use it a lot in government, but I don't hear it that much outside of that.
That's a good question. I don't know of any specific research. I would strongly suggest reaching out to user researchers who spend a lot of time in the space. Emma Thornhill, my colleague, is normally up for answering the question. She's senior user researcher at Scope. But I think it's context dependent as well. So it depends on the context. It's also like you can ask the same thing in more than one way. So access needs, do you do anything to help you get there on the day? And then again, reaching back to that design pattern, do you need a taxi? Do you need us to call you or send you a reminder text message the night before? You can find more than one way to say the same thing, and then you're not putting all your eggs in kind of one basket, one phrase.
Absolutely, and it comes back to that, what's important to that person, isn't it? Understanding your users, what's important to them can help with those design decisions. Absolutely. I don't think I've missed any other questions in the chat. And please jump in if I have missed something.
So there is one in the chat, which isn't Mike, it's Pauline. Hi, sorry again. There's one in the chat said, could you signpost me to some primary research on content design for neurodiversity? I have ADHD some of our own. Oh, so you've said that, didn't you?
Yes, yeah,
that's me. You have. As soon as I read the second bit, that's my neurodiversity, not reading the whole thing. That's my ADHD there. Sorry, I thought you'd missed that, and I'm really interested in that myself, obviously from a personal point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something for us to take away and look into if there's further guidance there. Brilliant. Well, I'll give. Oh, Joanna, come in. Just a quick hand up.
Yeah, no, I just want to say that for me, like something that I always try and keep in mind is that whether the person is disabled or not, like everybody's still got a user need. So just try to actually like remember that they need to do the thing, and then you can step back and be like, okay, what blocks might there be to them doing that thing? But I think sometimes we get really like, especially in government or public service, like we start talking about all this kind of like jargon terms, and we almost like that's not, you haven't done that here today, Jack, just so you know that. But you know, when we're having the discussion about access needs and access rider, I've never heard that term before, so I actually don't know what that one means. But we can get lost in this kind of like clinical language around it, and it obstructs the like actual human process that's happening. And so for me, it's always just trying to remember to go back to that very basic language of like, what is the actual task they're trying to complete, and how can we help them to do that, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a really solid point. I mean, all this stuff is deeply necessary, but it's also a way of solving the problem of disabled people being excluded from society and the design industry. Yeah, can people use your stuff? Can they do the thing? And if the people we were designing with and the people we were testing with were diverse, we wouldn't need this concerted effort. And we do need it, and that's because people are excluded.
And just one other thing that I've come across a lot in various roles is, and it's evidence here, like by people, you know, talking about their own conditions in the chat, and with you, Jack, as well, and with probably loads of people on this call, is just this kind of assumption that when we, in bracket, like little quotes, are designing for disabled people, also in little quotes, and they're like separate, like whereas we need to remember like they are us, we have to say, if we've done a good job, we have disabled people in our organizations, they might be in our design teams. And so again, just for me, it's a thing to be mindful, because I know when I've tried to advocate for some accessibility stuff, it's so othering the way that colleagues talk about it. It's like, oh well, and you know, what blind person's going to want to read this 100-page document? And you're like, well, we have blind colleagues, so
they are us. Yeah, and we want, you know, disabled people to work in policy. We need disabled people to work in policy. Yeah, that's a really solid point. And like the intersectional kind of implications of who we're excluding are massive. Like disability is one dimension, it's an important dimension, but we think about literacy levels, like very, very roughly, like almost half the population don't have sort of the equivalent of a grade, have a grade D or lower English GCSE reading level, and those are not the people who are in design teams. So like and that will intersect with disability as well. It'll be compounded by other dimensions too.
That's a really good point. Thank you, Joanna, for that, because it is that we're designing for people, and actually accessible design makes it better for everybody. If it's inclusive, even those without those diverse access needs will find it better and it'll be easier for everybody. So absolutely. Very conscious of the time. Any last quick questions in for Jack before we wrap up? Open to the floor. In that case, I'll just share my screen super quickly. This is one part of a series of accessibility events, and we do have a leadership event next week where Jack and myself are going to be on the panel with the Older People's Commissioner in Wales and with the Commissioner for the, I can never remember the acronym now, and I've put myself on the spot, this is always the way, the Equality and Human Rights Commissioner for Wales as well. So we're going to be doing a panel session for leaders. The in-person event is fully booked, but we will be streaming the event live as well.